Ever wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters podcast. Join host Julian Hay in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
To succeed at the C-suite, you need strategic clarity and operational excellence.
Risk and operations leadership today isn't about firefighting or process alone. It's about creating clarity, building resilient teams, and steering transformation under pressure. In today's episode, I speak with Jennifer Geary, a multi-time CRO and COO across banking, fintech, SaaS platform, and nonprofit sector. She's also the best-selling author of 5 books on leadership, from How to be a Chief Operating Officer to How to be a Chief Risk Officer, and the creator of the C-Suite framework, helping professionals step into senior roles with clarity and confidence. We explore the evolving demands on the C-Suite, the realities of the executive leadership, the power of frameworks, and how to lead well when everything feels uncertain. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, share, and leave a review. It helps others discover voices that shape the future of risk and leadership. For show notes, articles, and more, please visit avtm.com. I'm Julien Hay, and this is RiskMasters. Welcome everyone to this new episode of RiskMasters. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Jennifer Geary on the show. Jennifer is a multi-time actually author, former CEO, CRO. You've done many things, and I think we'll come back to that today. So Jenny, welcome on the show today.
Thank you, Julien. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I think we're going to go straight into it, right? So you've worked across banking, fintech, NGOs, tech, probably missed some of it actually. You're an author as well. You're doing training. What have been the pivotal moments that shaped how you lead and where you are today?
So I think we have to go back to the beginning for that one. So I started out in Dublin working for one of the global accounting firms, Arthur Andersen as it was, and was really proud and happy to get in there. And it was the place that everybody in that field wanted to join. And I spent 5 years with them, 3 years in Dublin in financial and then technology audit, and then 2 years with them in New York. And those of you who know the history of Arthur Andersen know what came next in 2002. So due to a big reputational issue associated with the Enron audit, I watched the first organization I ever worked for and was proud to work for. I watched it go from an organization of 80,000 people worldwide to 0 in the space of about 8 weeks due to reputation. And that was such a foundational and shocking experience. An organization that I loved, that we were, full of proud, hardworking professionals, getting something wrong, getting something obviously severely wrong, and the reputational fallout being so impactful. And I think that has probably shaped, how I calibrate risk, how I think about risk. I don't think it's made me overly risk averse, but it has made me and trained me to be very, very conscious of the impact that risk can have on an organization.
So risk aware, effectively.
Risk aware. I'm sure that's not the first time we'll say that today.
Probably not. And I actually love that example because I always think about an example of an organization that went down because of reputational risk, and I think you gave just a fantastic example. And so I'd like to get to, and perhaps that's going to be connected, was there a specific role or moment that pulled you into risk and operational leadership?
So I think risk in all its forms has really always been an element of the roles that I have done. So I started out in the third line of defense in technology and financial audit. I spent 13 very happy years at Barclays in a range of roles. The risk roles that I did, so I started out in operational risk, looking at things like logical access and segregation of duties across 150 of Barclays' top systems. I then went into Barclays Wealth and did a first line of defense role as global head of governance and control. Then I moved into the NGO space and working in a place like Save the Children, where you are sending humanitarians into conflict, into highly challenging, dangerous situations. You quickly learn how to calibrate risk in every decision that you make, and the impacts are very severe if you get something wrong in that space. And then after that, working in fintech, being able to be a little more agile, a little more free, but still to think about how to design risk from the get-go, not to build it in afterwards, was a liberating and sort of intellectually challenging thing. And then, of course, in recent years, I've tried to turn that into learning and into helping people, whether they're risk professionals or operational professionals or working in sustainability or people management, to calibrate risk in the right way.
And I think building on that, actually, and moving into your authorship, you're a multi-time author, best-selling books on how about to be a CEO, about how to be a chief risk officer, a chief people officer, I think a chief sustainability officer, the augmented CEO. So you've been quite prolific actually in that space, and you created that C-suite framework. So what would a successful C-suite leaders have in common across all of those functions? Because you kind of looked across a variety of roles.
Yeah, and just to stop for a second, and first of all, thank you. Coming from a prolific author yourself, I appreciate those comments. But the genesis for the first role was when I had completed my first full COO role in Save the Children. So prior to that, I had been chief of staff to a COO. I had held operational roles in technology, finance, legal, and so. But I still, when I took that first role on, I couldn't believe the breadth of what was involved in that role. And I also couldn't believe the lack of support there was for COOs, how little there was written about the role. So I took some time to think it through. I had to kind of learn things the hard way. But afterwards, I distilled what I thought the essence of the role was into 16 different disciplines and wrote about each of those and had those validated by experts in each of their fields. And that was the genesis of the first book. But to your question about what qualities unite and make for a successful C-suite officer, what I come back to all the time is two key things. One is real clarity of vision. So clarity on around strategy, what you're there to do, what the organization is there to do, more importantly, what it's not there to do. So I really value strategic clarity in leaders, and then the ability to take that strategy, to take that vision and to execute it. And you, of course, have to do that within the reality of the culture of an organization in which you're working. So always the first 3 chapters of my books are culture, strategy, and execution.
And you wrote about how to be a chief risk officer, which is a fantastic book, by the way, so I recommend it. Where are the gaps today when you look across organizations? Do you think people are applying what you're just saying, or are they still far away from them?
I think as a risk profession, I think we need to challenge ourselves, and I think we can do a lot better. We can come up for a lot of criticism, can't we, in the risk space? We can be called the naysayers, the Department of No. We get a lot of grief for burdening our business colleagues with endless RCSAs and forms to fill out and so on. And I think we need to challenge ourselves frankly, to do better. I'm going to say it, to lean in more to the strategy of the organization and what it's trying to achieve, to contextualize our risk management, to be deeply knowledgeable and embedded in the fabric of our organization, and to come up with risk proposals and solutions and challenge that are truly grounded in what the organization wants to do. And I think the more relevant we can make ourselves, the more knowledgeable we demonstrate ourselves to be, the more useful we're going to be to our organizations. So I think there's still lots that we can do.
And building on that, what's the biggest misconception people have about stepping into this type of role, right? Whether it's risk CEOs or chief people officers?
Yeah, I think one of the things I see a lot about people going from, let's say, risk director into that first C-suite role, or frankly, operational lead into COO and so on. Usually people get themselves into those positions through being just really excellent at the day-to-day execution of the role, right? They're technically adept, they're hardworking, they're respected, they know how to achieve things. And I think when you feel the privilege of stepping up into that first C-suite role, I think there's a temptation sometimes to sort of just dial up all of those elements. I'll be even more technical. I'll work even harder. I'll be even more productive. And actually, that can be quite counterproductive for somebody stepping into their first C-suite role. I strongly encourage people when they go into their first role, first of all, to prepare themselves, to get very quiet, to calm down, to think about the organization they're either joining or being promoted within and what it's trying to do, and to think about their new relationships that they're going to have to form. Because you will have presumably already had interaction with lots of other departments, but when you're sitting around that C-suite table, every single individual has come up through a different path with a different educational background, with a different set of skills, a different set of priorities, a different definition of success. And your most important role in that first C-suite role, in those first days and weeks and months of the role, is to establish and form relationships with those people who may think very, very differently to you. And you've got to define shared versions of success, shared ways, what's going to work, how are we going to collectively achieve success. It's much more about stepping back a little bit, often going a little more slowly, actually, taking time to build the relationships, taking time to set course. In that first senior role, what you will find is your words and actions carry more weight than ever before. So it's about often making fewer, but more well-judged, more strategic actions, and then letting the organization take those forward.
And I'd love to get your views actually on something that goes beyond that. In my experience, an executive team is a team on its own, right? So it has to come and operate as a group beyond the remit of the leaders of this function. What are, in your views, and based on the book you wrote, the characteristic of an effective executive team? Do you have a view on that?
I think you said it. That ability to form a cohesive, high-performing team that is able to work collectively as a group, that's able to for twos and threes around that table to come together and execute well. Ideally, what you don't want is the sort of hub and spoke CEO, and I have seen that model, and it's really draining actually when every executive has to sort of go through the CEO to agree something or to get something done. And if you are a leader of a team where you see that, or where you've inadvertently become that hub, I think you need to try and get yourself out of that a little bit and encourage cross-departmental cooperation and facilitation. So I think, that ability to trust and work together and to have shared objectives, and then also for people, individuals within that group to come together and do what needs to be done. And
has writing across this function changed how you lead or think about executive work?
I definitely think it's made me more systematic. It has given me great confidence to have a playbook, and I hope it doesn't sound arrogant to say it, but after I wrote my first book, when I went into further roles, I would go back and consult. I would go back and consult chapters of what I've written, and in fact, my co-author of the Chief People Officer book, Anne Kiley, when she took on a huge Chief People Officer role shortly after writing the book for the Irish flagship airline Aer Lingus, and she said to me, Jenny, I go back into, what was it? That was a really good framework I had there. What do I do? So I think it does give you, it reminds you that there is, and it's not obviously uniform and rigid, but there is a framework that you can lean back on. And if something's not working, or if you're having difficulty getting something, to happen the way you want it to, sometimes just going back to that framework can be really helpful.
And have you seen similar characteristics across this function? So if you were to jump from one to the other, are there similarities?
Well, I think the essence of success at the C-suite role, there are some things, I've talked about them already: culture, strategy, execution. Also, you have to know how to be able to build your team. You have to know how to be able to guard time for yourself, to step back, keep your head up, see what the next iteration is, see what the next strategic change is. So some of those skills unite all C-suite leaders, I think. Then, of course, in the center, you have a hard core of technical ability, and there's no getting away from that. And that's obviously where across my books, all the books are written sort of bespoke, but there are some similarities in those opening and closing chapters and how you think about being an effective leader. And then obviously there is a core, so for example, in Risk, I go through I define a pyramid of risk from strategic down through people, financial, technical, and operational, and sustainability, and things like how to create a control framework, how to define good controls. So there's always that core technical bit, and that's what differs. But being an effective executive, yes, there are things and similarities.
And I think in one of your books, you've said that what got you here won't be what will get you there. Right? And that can feel unhelpful to new leaders and can be perhaps a little bit scary, actually. So what do you say instead?
Yeah, I absolutely. And this was something that I remember being said to me as I got more senior in places like Barclays. Oh, what got you here won't get you there. And I think just saying that on its own without some further context is not that helpful to people. I think what it means, or what's useful to take from that, is you do need to change some aspects of how you work, particularly when you step into those senior C-suite roles. Again, it's back to these, like I said, relationships, fewer, more impactful actions, leading with culture, setting the tone, realizing that your actions reverberate through an organization. And if you, like me, I think, get a lot of comfort from just working very, very hard and delivering lots of things and ticking boxes and getting things done. Yes, of course, there's an element of that to the role, but you've got to maybe dial down some of that a little bit and be a little more patient. The work at executive level often takes a little bit longer to unfold. So being okay with that and calming down and taking the time really on relationships, I think is a more useful way of thinking about that sentence, what got you here won't get you there.
It feels a little bit that it's a shift from being very operationally driven, which has a time horizon, very short time horizon, right, to being more strategically driven, as you say, with a vision, which has a medium to long-term time horizon. So the time horizon is expanding, isn't it?
Absolutely right. And some people don't like it. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough as well. I know of someone who was a chief financial officer and then an interim chief executive. And she said to me afterwards, I'm really glad to be back in my role. I didn't want that chief executive role. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't my strong suit. I did it, and she did it, by the way, very effectively. And I think she could have done it more. But in her mind, it wasn't what she enjoyed or derived satisfaction or comfort or security from. So, those roles aren't for everybody. And some people who are happier with the execution and that kind of just, technical doing of the role may not enjoy stepping into that different role.
So now I'd like to drive us somewhere, actually, for the first time on this show we're going to do. So I would like to do a little bit of role play, if that's okay with you. And the scenario will be, let's say someone just stepped into a chief risk officer role at a high growth fintech, which I think you've done, right? So governance is loose, compliance is getting more complex by the day, and the business is pushing fast to go ahead. And they've got 90 days to land well. So let's play with that a little bit. Where should they begin?
Well, I think actually they need to begin before they took on the role. And what I mean by that is, it's fine to have a fast-moving, high-growth, ambitious organization, but I would want to satisfy myself before I went in there that they were going to balance that with an appropriate approach to risk. So I would actually be setting out my stall and also hearing from them in terms of how far they're willing to push things, whether they will listen to me. If I say, look, guys, we're pushing up against something here. This isn't feeling great. I'm hearing from people. This isn't good. One of my favorite questions when I'm talking to the person who will say ultimately be my boss in that scenario will be, what happens the first time we disagree, right? This is all feeling lovely. We're having a great interview and so on. But what happens what happens if we disagree? How does that resolve itself? And I need to know, like, for example, if it's going to be the chief executive who will be my boss, that they're going to respect the risk agenda. They're not going to do the, I used to call it, if mum says no, ask dad as a pair, as a pair, or if dad says no, ask dad. But the idea that if you go to one person and you get one answer, you go to the other person and you get a different answer. You've got to feel, I believe anyway, as a chief risk officer, that, the chief executive, the executive team has your back. And it's fine for there to be give and take. It's fine for there to be push and pull. That's healthy. And that's why you have that sort of balanced balanced executive team. But I think you want to say, if I'm going to come in here and if I'm going to help you be that success that you want to be, we're only going to do that if we know how far to go on things. We know the risks that we consciously want to take. And risk management isn't about taking zero risk, right? There's commercial risks you can take, there's pricing, there's going into new markets, right? There's all sorts of risks that organizations take every day. But there's going to be some risks that we don't want to take, and there's going to be some places where we set appetite and we don't want to go beyond there. So I know I've slightly maybe, given you a trick answer to a question, which is I would establish a lot beforehand. Obviously, if you're satisfied with those answers and you come in and you join the organization, then it's about really understanding and investing in the strategy and what's going to make the organization successful, and showing your stakeholders that you care about the success of the organization just as much as they do. And so that if you say, guys, this isn't okay, we can't do this, we've got a problem, I'm going to slow you down, we can't launch tomorrow, we can't do whatever it is, that it's coming from a place of wanting the organization to succeed. I did have a situation in an organization I worked in where I was the sole dissenting voice. And it hasn't happened often, and it really shouldn't happen very often because you've set expectations in advance. But there was a moment, and there was a judgment call, and I said, guys, I'm sorry, we're not ready, this isn't okay. However, this is what it's going to take to get it sorted, and I think we can have it all done within 24 hours. And because I had built those relationships with people, they knew I cared, they knew I wasn't being a blocker just for the sake of it, and we got it done in 24 hours and we got it out safely.
So effectively, and just to put that into context, preparing in advance of starting the role for me will also be asking the right question during the interview process, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is, obviously you get past a point where hopefully you've convinced them that you're the right person for the job. But you say, look, if I come in, if we come in to do this, and I really want to do this, and I want this to be a success, but that's going to mean that we make the right judgment calls along the way. And, the path, is littered with organizations that got that risk reward, risk judgment, risk strategy equation wrong, and we don't want to do that. So asking those questions, sounding people out, figuring out how you're going to, I'll quote from another podcast, disagree agreeably, right? Figuring out and how you're going to work a problem and come up with a solution. Yeah,
I've come across in my work, but also on LinkedIn, actually, of horror stories of especially startup where they didn't figure that out. And when they disagree the first time, it just blows up.
Yeah. Everyone's been violently in agreement and it's been super exciting all the way. And then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, and we haven't prepared for this and we don't know how to work that problem. So yeah, I would establish some of that up front.
And how would your framework help them assess their environment, build relationship, and define priorities?
So it comes back to, and in fact, in my COO book in particular, I obviously set up the culture, strategy, execution elements, and then sort of 16 disciplines, or in the risk book, the different elements of risk and so on. But in the COO book, for example, I actually talk about red flags. And so things to watch, things that might indicate a team that is less than highly functional, that's having some problems. And then also what to do if you have a really high functioning team, because you're going to want to manage that team differently. So how you can take something from good to great, how you can, if you have a really high performing leader, leading up a team, how you can continue to motivate them, stretch them, allow them to spread some of that good practice around the organization. So again, one of the early things as a CRO or C-suite executive is to figure out where you're going to need to devote your time. And it's not going to be equally across all your responsibilities. You're going to need to judge that.
It really depends on the starting point, isn't it?
Absolutely. How mature are we? Where are their problems? Where is their capability? What bits are going just fine? And actually leave them be. Don't micromanage them. Versus where, and so for example, in the risk space, obviously it can be things like a history of risk events. It can be poor processes. But sometimes it's more nascent things like just a complete lack of a risk framework, a lack of a risk-aware culture. It hasn't even occurred to people. And sometimes actually it might be nascent, but sometimes there's some really good risk management. I remember again, in one of the fintechs I worked in, a tech team that was running really fast that I sometimes thought were a little bit, casual around risk until something went wrong. And then I was really impressed actually with how they self-organized themselves, how they interrogated what had gone wrong, and they asked some really good questions like, where did we get lucky? How could it have been worse? Why did this happen? 5 whys descending down through it. And actually, they didn't call it risk management, but that's exactly what they were doing. And sometimes you can harness that and you can say, you mightn't realize it, but that's risk management. And that, help them fill in the forms, help them do the things because they're actually doing it. So yeah, it can take different forms.
And what advice do you give leaders when they are managing experts in areas where they're not the experts?
Well, this is a key skill for somebody coming into the C-suite role, and particularly, so I said it in the COO book, if you're overseeing 16 disciplines, there is no way you are an expert in all of those. You simply can't be. You've got to know enough about them to be effective, but and then similarly in risk, say you've come up through operational risk and all of a sudden you're overseeing market and credit risk or one of the others, or new areas like AI, data, information security. It's changing and evolving all the time. And one of the key skills, one of the key things you've got to get comfortable with as a CRO is at times managing people who are more technical than you. And I remember, it wasn't a C-suite role, but leading a technical team of developers and finding a language to say, okay, we're not going to get into technical coding terms here, but explain to me what the problem is, explain to me what you're trying to do. And I've never not been able to get to a point of understanding with the technical team when you get down to breaking it down into understandable terms.
It's about knowing enough to be dangerous, isn't it? That's something one of my boss used to say.
Yeah, and not being defensive about the fact that there are people with deeper technical knowledge in spaces than you. In fact, having that person shine, bring them to the risk committee, have them educate the rest of the C-suite team. Don't hide that. Don't be worried about that. You're not expected to be technically more knowledgeable than everybody else. You've just got to be able to steer the group.
And actually, building on that, it's a perfect segue to the next question. You're a system thinker, right? And also someone who talks a lot about leadership clarity. And you're already alluding to that into the first thing around having a vision, etc. Mm-hmm. How do you approach psychological safety in a fast-moving executive teams in that context?
So, and by the way, obviously, Julien, I love your book. I reviewed your book. This clarity with which you talked about psychological safety perhaps being that thing that unlocks the effectiveness of your whole risk framework, I thought was just really, really interesting. So psychological safety, we went into that in a big way, obviously, in the Chief People Officer book, as you might expect. But I think it's a matter of it's being deliberate, isn't it? It's building it into things. It's not expecting it to just happen. And it's demonstrating it through your leadership and through your tone at the top. So one of the things I often do, I think, is just bring a level of candor to a discussion when maybe it's not there, when people are afraid to voice things. And I'll be the one to say, look, let's talk about the elephant in the room. What we're really worried about happening here is that this breaks and that happens and a customer's affected or whatever it is. And sometimes you being the one to be brave enough to say, look, this is what could happen. This is what we're worried about. What do people think about that? Is that why is that not an issue? Tell me why I shouldn't be worried about that. And I think just bringing that level of candor and showing people that it's okay to speak up. I'm reading a book at the moment. We might come back to it at the end. It's called Dark Pattern, and it's just about how corporate scandals can unfold. And it's just that fear of speaking up, isn't it? So if you're the one to speak up, or be the first person to back up somebody else who says, look, I'm a bit worried about this. And you go, that's a great point. Let's work this problem and that kind of thing. So be that strength, be that shield, spread your wings, and protect that person and encourage that speaking up, and people will start to see that it's okay. And
you've also touched on your work with a nonprofit, right? So you led major strategic programs at Save the Children, Santander's. How did you align operational execution with organizational mission?
It's one of the things I it's the first thing I do. So at Save the Children, I helped the organisation think about the next 15 years of its mission and what it wanted to do. And before we set any kind of operational or budgetary or financial plans, we went right back to the core of what it was that made us special, what it was that we were trying to do, our place in the world. And, it's pretty motivating when you start saying things like, we can be the generation that ends needless child death from poverty or disease and so on, right? So you go back to what that's about, and then you think about, well, what is it about us that makes us capable of doing that? What are it's classic SWOT analysis. It's all the things, but what is it that we uniquely do? What is it that we do so well that we want to dial up and that we want to apply to the problems that we're facing? And then and only then, when you've had that clarity and had everyone around the table submit their element of that, then do we say, okay, now let's think about what we want to do in the next 12 months, in the next 2 years, 3 years, and so on.
And if I flip that view around, so here it's the positive side of things people should be doing. Where do C-suite teams often fall short when it comes to culture and governance in your experience?
Oh, I think so. I think a lack of clarity is still there sometimes. I think sometimes people start with great intentions. They come up with inspiring, missions and visions and so on, but they don't take the time to get specific around what that means. I'm a great fan of Dr. Max McEwen and his strategy books, and he really shows you that success strategically is about charting a course. It's about a series of milestones and decisions that you make along the way, and somewhere in there the formula to success exists. But you've got to there's lots of woolly strategic statements out there, lots of woolly mission and vision statements. There are lots of quite poorly crafted risk appetite statements, I think. Lots of fluffy words. We wish to be the most admired this. Just things that are frankly not useful. People talking about zero risk appetite when that's just not a thing. Zero risk appetite for cyber risk, zero risk appetite for information security risk. It's not possible unless you want to unplug from the internet. Zero strategic. No, it's actually, there's very few situations in which you can take really zero risk and be in business. So I think we've got to get a lot more realistic and better at calibrating, using the right words, and understanding that at board level, when you set a risk appetite, that has those words will cascade down in some very precise ways in the organization. And I think there's lots more we can do in that space.
Oh, I was going to say or not, because sometimes it simply stays on paper.
Yes, that too.
And in the Augmented Coup, you explore how AI and automation are reshaping leadership. In fact, nowadays we can't talk about anything without talking about AI and Gen AI, etc. So what does an augmented C-suite look like to you? Yeah,
so I did a year ago, I put out just a small handbook that sort of supplements, in particular, the COO book, but also all the other C-suite roles. And it was kind of... It was an experiment for me as well, because I used AI very transparently in the forming and shaping of some of the answers. And I talk about which bits are AI and which bits are me. But I basically went across the 16 different disciplines and I said, how will AI help you? First of all, let's look at the possibilities and the opportunities. How will AI threaten you and cause you problems in this space? And then where do you sit with that, and what's your unique role? And actually, it was a great thought exercise, and I think just a useful short handbook read just to frame people's thinking on things. But I came away quite optimistic that the essence of what we do as C-suite leaders is applying judgment. I'm hopeful, used properly, that C-suites will have better data, better analysis, faster at their fingertips, more curated data. But obviously with that then comes a responsibility to make the right judgment calls and to spend more time on judgment. And then, of course, you've got to navigate all of the issues around ethics, data, usage, privacy, and where that's going to go. So, but I still see, more than ever, I think the role of humanity, ethics and judgment, which for now, I think we still have the upper hand on the machines.
Well, I think so too. Although from an ethics standpoint, I think we have more work to do, but that's a personal opinion.
Well, there is that.
Do you see the boundaries between executive role, whether COO, CRO, CPOs, etc., becoming more fluid?
I think in some cases, yes. I think particularly in the technical space, I think chief information officer, data officer, AI officer, information security officer, I think there's definitely some movement around there, and that will continue to evolve over time. Obviously, these roles are not, set in stone, and in fact, every COO role in particular is unique, just given the functions that they will oversee, and indeed the CEO that they have. For chief risk officer, I think it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how the three lines of defense evolve. Whether we sort of keep this, segregation between, audit. And business and risk, and whether that's serving us correctly. And I think there's been some quite passionate arguing, I think, for more sharing of knowledge and know-how and information. And that is in no way breaching the three lines of defense. In fact, that's making the three lines of defense more effective over time. So, yeah, it's going to move.
Well, that's going to be on my next book, so we can talk about it once
Okay.
it's out. And what emerging risks or trends do you think leaders still underestimate?
Gosh, this is a question I love to ask. In fact, I asked Michael Rasmussen this on my podcast last week. I think there's it's the risk in plain sight, isn't it? I think sometimes it's complacency setting in. So for the last year and a half, I've been talking about geopolitics and how that was just a neglected area altogether. I don't think it's something that we ever really sort of trained on. And in fact, my personal investment in myself, next month I'm going on a 3-day immersive geopolitical course led by Rain because I want to sharpen my antenna as a chief risk officer. And it will not make me an expert by any means, but it will give me a framework, a systematic framework to think about geopolitics and how it affects everything from, supply chain to operations to people management and so on. So I would say geopolitics is one. And, I don't want to say we're underestimating AI because we talk about AI the whole time. But the one thing we don't know for sure is how it's going to impact us along the way. So, I would say those ones. And I would say beware the risk in plain sight, beware the complacency.
Well, to quote Michelle Walker, who was actually on this show, the gray rhinos, right? The thing people know about but are not doing anything about.
Yeah, is a grey rhino and a black swan. We talk about, black swans. We talk about, COVID being a black swan. But, we also know that we had a global pandemic 100 years previously. And we had some version of that in all of our risk registers along the way. So it's often we have a version of a risk emerging, but we just have it doesn't emerge in the way that we thought. And one of the things that I learned, particularly about things like, resilience, business continuity planning, and so on, is it's not the plan, it's the know-how, it's the corporate know-how in pulling the right people together in the right way, working a problem, knowing who's got the authority to make decisions in a crisis. So you think about things like ransomware attacks and some of the really difficult decisions that some retailers had to make in the last few months, knowing how to take decisions quickly in real time and having the trust and the corporate muscle and the execution and the know-how to get it done.
In fact, you were mentioning, as I was checking my phone because you were mentioning AI and how to use AI to get some information. So I did a little plague with ChatGPT for my latest article on Operation Resilience, and I've asked it to be, what would be the risk you will be concerned about if you were an information officer?
Okay.
Not a CRO and the normal list around climate change, etc. Go beyond that. What would you be concerned about? And it came back with an interesting list, actually, of things I never thought about, like cascading infrastructure failures. Concentration of critical minerals and material in few geographies. In fact, that's an interesting one because I saw an article from China. China is saying that or threatened or corporate that will stockpile some minerals, the rare earth, for example, to block them from accessing them if they stockpile those things. Physical vulnerabilities, especially undersea cables, as we know, but also space-based infrastructures, which we know can be an issue now. Manipulation of information environment, convergence of attack. So there are a number of things you can get from AI that goes beyond the normal list of things you will have in your risk register.
Yeah, it's very thoughtful, isn't it? And, I mean, I did talk about geopolitics and supply chains, but that's exactly right. The concentration of resources, what that does in terms of countries and what they do to each other. And as resources get more scarce, as climate risks ramp up and so on, even things like water, power, obviously, as those things intensify, there's all sorts of modeling we could do to see what might happen as a result of that. And of course, the biggest risk of all that frankly we are underestimating is sustainability, because we've become a little bit complacent. It's become politicized. We talk about who's in or out of the net zero banking alliance and so on, and it's all just a little bit depressing, isn't it? And the thing that gives me hope is the sustainability professionals and the people who are still quietly working away, making things better, making things more efficient, reducing waste, decarbonizing. But it's the one that is going to become very real very quickly, I think.
On that very positive note, I'd like to move our discussion toward the more personal side. What keeps you inspired, especially after 5 books and a packed executive career?
I really enjoy bringing clarity to situations. So that's whether in my capacity as a non-exec director for a software company, whether that's coaching people, whether that's delivering my training or speaking at a conference. If you can give people some insight, unlock something, help them see through the busyness and the fog, and to just zone in and laser in on a clear point of thought about what needs to be done or where they need to go or what next step they need to take in their career. I get a real buzz out of that, and I do it formally in coaching and less formally with friends and colleagues and so on. But and it's actually terrifying sometimes when you see someone and they've terrifying in a good way when they and they've done, I heard what you said and I thought about that and I'm doing this, and you go, oh my God, that's terrifying, but that is fantastic. We've unlocked something and you're moving forward and you've just taken yourself and your whole performance up a level. So I love that and I'm inspired by that. Yeah.
And so. And we were talking about it. So what's next for the C-Suite framework? Another book, new directions, something different?
So, well, on the basis of that, so this year, 2025, has been an awful lot about taking all of the content that I had, which was primarily in book format, and putting it into different formats for people. So I recorded some audibles. Some people obviously love to consume information that way, and a number of people have written to me and said, I just want to listen to your book in my car when I'm going to and from work or on the train. So into audibles, and of course now into online courses. So that was a big thing for me to create these online courses that you can, they're available via Teachable or via my website, and to talk to screen and to bring the content to life and lace it with some more case studies and some more tools and techniques and that kind of thing. So more of that. There may be another book in the pipeline, Julian. I may have found a collaborator in the compliance space. So watch this space. It'll be a next year publication at this rate, but fingers crossed, I may have found the right person for a book number 6. And actually, one thing in the CRO space that I'm really excited about, the Lord Mayor of London, Alistair King, has been a real proponent of the risk community, the CRO network, and he has been working with Bayes Business School and with a number of people such as myself to create a CRO network. And we're launching a survey, and we're holding an event, a launch event in the coming months to just give CROs a place where they can come together, debate the issues of the day, get support. It can be a very lonely spot, can't it, being a CRO, and you don't always have people to ask, but to do some responsible risk taking and to learn from their colleagues and so on. So that's coming up, and hopefully also speaking at a risk conference in Cyprus in November, which I'm looking forward to as well.
Lovely. So we'll have to have you back on this show to talk about your maybe future book.
Perhaps. I couldn't possibly say any more at this point, Julian. But yes, I would love to come back.
And so you've given already a lot of insights and advice, but any other one piece of advice you'd give to someone stepping into their first executive role?
Take the time for yourself to prepare. If you can, take yourself away. I before a big role, I try and take myself away for a night or two with my notebook, with reading materials, with books, all that kind of thing. Try and get really thoughtful and quiet and think about what success is going to mean in this new role. Empty your suitcases from your last role, in particular if you're being promoted internally. Don't come to the role dragging behind a legacy of meetings and responsibilities and so on. Empty the suitcases, come fresh, come clean and ready to redefine this new role. And because, showing up on that first day prepared, focused, utterly focused on what it's going to take to make a success will stand you in good stead over time.
Have you ever given a TED Talk?
I have not given a TED Talk. I've given lots of talks. I have not done the TED Talk yet.
So if you were to give a TED Talk on something outside of the C-suite framework, which is quite vast, by the way, so I'm not sure what topic you will cover, but what would it be?
You told me you were going to ask me this question, and I really had to think about this one. Two possible things came to mind that I feel passionate about. One is, and I talked about this with a coaching client not so long ago, but having been through my parents' illness and passing of both of them, one 2 years ago, one 11 years ago, patient advocacy, I think, is something I feel incredibly strongly about. And, my experiences and what I did to vouch for and advocate for my parents when they were ill, I think is so that whole area of healthcare and patient advocacy and patient outcomes, I think is important. Another area that I feel incredibly passionate about, and just coming off an amazing weekend, is music and the joy of music. So I sing in a choir. It's called London City Voices. We just had 300 of us perform on Sunday in the sunshine with several hundred more guests there, and the ability to bring people together to help with mental health,
to bring joy, to bring happiness, to test your brain in a completely different way. So off the top, those are two topics completely outside of the risk zone that I feel very passionate about.
Leadership to future
can we find the recording of your choir anywhere?
You absolutely can. If you go onto YouTube and you look up London City Voices Summer Party, you will see us in all our finery, and it's just a spectacle and completely joyful.
Here we go, so we know where to find you now. And finally, what book, article or podcast has influenced your thinking recently?
Check out.
Yeah, well, other than yours, of course, Julian. That was a great read. But as I think I mentioned it earlier, there's this one called Dark Patterns, and I have to say, it's quite a depressing book. Guido Palazzo is the author, and it's well told, but it just identifies 9 characteristics of corporate scandals and corporate breakdowns, and it's things like toxic leadership and unattainable goals, and but it's depressing because it just feels familiar. You read some of the behaviors and you go, oh no, and you see a pattern repeating along the way. And
did you want me to say that?
I think. What it's
taught
taught me, just thinking about the risk space as well, is we have to go beyond the mechanics, actually, and we have to, really look in our organisations and see what we see. Do we see people actively working problems? Do we see people able to speak their mind? Do we see dissonance between what's being said and what's being done, and goals and what's achievable, and so on? And it's made me think about that onus on us as risk professionals to really look with our eyes and go beyond just the frameworks. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. Jenny, thank you so much for your time and all your insights and wisdom today. It was a real treat to have you on the show, and definitely we will have you next year ahead of your maybe book release.
Maybe indeed. No, Julian, it's been an absolute pleasure being here, and thank you for all you do. Love the RiskMasters podcast, and keep doing what you do as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of RiskMasters. I hope you found my conversation with Jenny as insightful and energizing as I did. From practical frameworks to psychological safety, and from cross-sector leadership to future-focused risk thinking, Jenny offered a rare window into what it really takes to succeed in the C-suite, not just in title, but in impact. To explore her work and dive into her books, visit csuiteframework.co.uk, and don't forget to check out additional show notes and resources at avitium.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, rate, and review RiskMasters. It helps us keep bringing you conversations that matter. Until next time, stay curious, stay resilient, and remember, leadership starts with clarity, courage, and conversation. I'm Julien A., and this has been RiskMasters.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julianhay.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.